So my name is Petteri, and I'm from the Finnish Environmental Institute, which is a governmental research organization aiming to provide knowledge to support decision-making on environmental issues. We are about 500 people in different topical centers. I'm from the Ecosystem Services Unit of the Biodiversity Center, where I'm working as a researcher with a focus on trying to measure and quantify biodiversity. And my personal approach to that is kind of this data-driven, quantitative approach. So my topic today is mapping and assessment of ecosystem services in Finland. And as we heard from the previous talks, that a lot of this work happens in the different projects. Some of those are regional projects, some are national projects, and some are these larger European projects like Esmeralda or what are those projects. So one of the difficulties is exactly to actually somehow combine the different results of these approaches. I'm not going to try to go them all through. Instead, I'm going to describe you some of the tools that we have in SYKE, and then some of what I think is most interesting development at the moment. And then in the end, if we have time, I'm going to go through some of the projects that are currently running about mapping and assessment of ecosystem services. So I'll jump straight on. So basically, SYKE is an expert organization with aiming to provide knowledge. And from the biodiversity perspective, one of the clearinghouse mechanisms, or one of the main tools of actually delivering that knowledge that is produced in different projects is this biodiversity.fi, which is this kind of the main feature of it is this page where each of the different ecosystem types are listed. And then under each of these ecosystem types, there are different indicators on the describing condition of that ecosystem type. And I think there are something like 146 different indicators currently. I think it's a great resource. What we are still lacking is the spatial dimension. So only quite few of these indicators are spatially explicit. So they are more like describing the development in Finland or in the different areas of Finland, but not in a like a pixel by pixel spatial way as we were seeing here previously. Another thing is that the data flows, because the data comes from the projects, quite often the information is updated only when there is a project collecting that information. So basically that means that some of the data might be lacking, and it's not always clear where does the information come from? So how was it produced, and what were the kind of the modifications that were done on the way? It has a sister site, I would say, the similar kind of an approach, but describing ecosystem services in Finland. It's based on the KIKKES-osaises, however you pronounce that, that classification. It lists the main categories, and again lists the different ecosystem services under it, and then have some kind of data on the development and then description on the whole Finland. The approach is described better in the paper that you can see in the corner. Then final part of the page is this part that lists biodiversity action plan in Finland. So basically the response is to CPD, the Convention on Biological Diversity. So how are Finland progressing in that? And basically, it is listing the actions, 105 actions that are in the Finnish action plan, and then describing data on how it looks like, how we are doing in that. And it has this kind of final summarizing traffic light system, which tells that if it's green, it's doing well, yellow, there's still work to do, and then red, unfortunately, there are still these red lights too, that there is no work yet started to that. And that is kind of directly linked to the reporting by Finland, which is coordinated by SYKE to the CPD, and it lists all the indicators there too. So as I said, that quite few of those indicators are spatial, and that's kind of the biggest research field currently, or the aim of our research in our team currently, and we are we are using this essential biodiversity variables approach, or at least trying to apply it to the same condition. And if you are not familiar with that, the essential biodiversity variables is a concept that is developed in the geopon community, and the idea is to find the minimum set of measurements and to standardize those measurements that would be enough to complementary describe the changes in environment. And the idea is that the variables would be something that is between the raw data from the observations and the indicators that are actually describing the state of the nature. And one of the kind of key contributors from the last years was this paper, which was about how essential biodiversity variables and remote sensing can help natural biodiversity monitoring. And there we went through different essential biodiversity variables and checked how that coincides with the biodiversity indicators that we have developed. But also check that whether there would be these remote sensing products and what we would need more to be able to map those spatially explicitly. And now what you can see here is just one of the graphs from the paper, and you can see on the rows are the biodiversity our variables, and then the essential biodiversity variables in the columns. And for example, the first one, the amount of deadwood in forests, you can see that it kind of links pretty well with the structural ecosystem variable, so which are describing ecosystem structure. It has some interlinkages, for example, to population abundances, because it's maybe the biggest driver of endangerment of species in a forested landscapes in Finland, the lack of deadwood. And then you can see that there are some like essential biodiversity variables, like the genetical compositions, where there's only quite little information currently in our system. And it's also unfortunate because those are also really difficult to get using remote sensing. Like the structural variables are much easier to see from space, but you really can't see genes from the space yet. And another kind of field of development currently is trying to really link the remote sensing data to biodiversity. And now here, just a result of one example which we were doing, was about using the laser scanning data of one area and try to link that to observation of species. And trying to see whether it could be actually possible, or the laser scanning data were used to produce forest indicators, forest structure indicators, and those were then linked to observation of species. And we found that some of the species are indeed possible to link to these kind of structural variables, but some others, like goshawk, which has like a lot of larger range, that becomes much more difficult. But that's a field development, and I'm going to show you some. Currently, there is a mapping or laser scanning of the whole Finland is almost done. So pretty soon we will have, or actually now we have the laser scanning of the whole country, and that of course offers a great possibility to build the indicators any bit further. Then the final kind of thing that I would like to introduce you is the red list of ecosystems. That is a major contribution from SYKE. So SYKE is coordinating this assessment of ecosystem types that is happening every 10th year. Now, 1 year ago, we released the second version of this red list of ecosystems, and this time it was using the IUCN red list of ecosystem classification system, which is kind of standardized system developed by IUCN. And to kind of advertise it to you, the English version of the document just came out. So if you are interested, that's available in English now, and you can check and take a look. And the kind of the main outcome of this was that maybe approximately almost half of the habitats were threatened somehow in Finland. So there's still a lot of work for us. And the idea was that it actually involved a lot of expert work. So how the information was collected. It was collected in the expert working groups, where the experts of different habitats were asked what do they think about it, and then they used their own data sources, but how the data was used was not that explicit. So this is kind of my favorite project at the moment, and this is what I kind of think is kind of the interesting development, which is this Finnish Ecosystem Observatory. It's a kind of an approach that has been bubbling under for a few years, and finally now it looks like that we are starting to actually implement it. Last year we already had like a planning phase, but hopefully this year we can really start working. And the idea of this system is to try to collect the information that is produced in the different projects, that not only the information, but also how the information was processed and to which context it was used to a one place so that you could have a good overview on the state of ecosystems in Finland, and also you could reuse the information and the data and how the processing flows that were used in the previous projects. So the idea of the system here the ecosystem observatory is actually the circle, the red circle there, and it contains as its core something that we have been planning already now, so which would be an information system, and the idea of this information management system is that it collects use cases, and use cases here means different purposes, different policy needs. For example, the red list of ecosystems, we would need information on the overgrowth of sand beaches. Then the data links means that it doesn't really store the data, but it links what kind of data was used to solve this problem. For example, remote sensing data and what kind of processing libraries means that how that data was processed. For example, you produced NDVI, vegetation index, to see how the sand beaches are overgrowing. And the idea is that it's not the data and the process and the use case wouldn't be a separate thing, but it would be kind of, the idea would be to describe data flows instead, so that it keeps kind of connecting all the issues. And of course, the important part within this ecosystem observatory would be to go through what are the policy needs. As we heard here, there's a major challenge to combine the data that we have. I think that's even bigger challenge than being able to map these, is to how to combine these to decision making. So one part of this is to actually go through what are the needs, and those needs of decision making are driving the development. And the idea is that then this ecosystem observatory could be used to communicate, as we saw earlier, the biodiversity.fi, for example, reporting to CPD or EU, the different like Habitats Directive, or the national reporting needs. And it could also be in touch and communicate with these kind of global agendas, like the IPPES, to provide knowledge, but also giving a little bit of this context where it works, and also use the GeoBon or whatever elder networks. And the other components that should be in the observatory are this in situ observation. So basically, the idea is that, well, I'm going to show you, is that the ecosystem observatory wouldn't collect data in itself, but instead it would use all the different data sources that are already available, so drawing those together and how those are used in this decision-making context. For example, remote sensing, but also observations of species from the nature. And then again, the idea is that the ecosystem observatory in itself wouldn't have a net website or anything. It would be simply the engine that works under different websites, like the biodiversity.fi, and then for example, the indicators on biodiversity.fi would be linked to the observatory. And now every time the data sets update that are related to certain indicators, also, at least this is my hope in the future, also the indicators on the website would automatically update. So the processing would happen and the new maps or new indicators would come out. So just to kind of go through what I kind of explained it already. So the idea is that it's not about data, it's not about indicators, or it's not about the policy that is supported by the indicators, but it's about documenting the whole flow from the data, be it remote sensing, be it in situ data, to how it was processed to produce some indicator and to some where that indicator is used, in what kind of political context. And currently, as I said, there are many projects. We have a lot of these producing chains already available, but they are in different researchers' heads, they are in different institutions, and if you want to know what do we actually have, it's really difficult to access those, as Stig were mentioning, this siloing thing. So basically the idea is that this is a simplified picture, so that the ecosystem observatory or its information management system would kind of collect all those together, so that we can actually, anytime you want to know what data is used, how it's used, in what political context, and how it's processed, or if you want to rerun the process, we could just go there and run it again. And so why would we like to do this? Is of course the advantages is that it's a reduced workflow, so we would like to avoid repetition. So there's a lot of work done, and the next time, for example, we are reporting to CPD, there's no need to start from scratch, that we could just use this old data and old code to support the actions. And then also building on previous experiences. So what I mean that next time we would like to do something, I would go and see whether there are similar kind of things done already in other projects, and I could use the same processing, same data flows, but modified to a new need. So kind of building on that what we know earlier. And this, I think for me, it's important to increase transparency, because I think that this also includes the policy uptake, is that if we just give the outcome, that's good, but I think it's also important to know what was behind the outcome. So basically being openly available, or the data processing being openly available for people. And then of course, like the methods change, so if the processing chain is also saved, then you can always see how the processing was done and how that affects the change in the results. And then I think that this reduces error. It's like an open source software that if you also bring available the methods, so people can go and see the errors and correct them there, and then we can rerun the analyses. And it, of course, forces people to use good documentation on what was done and how was one done. And finally, I think the aim is to improve data use. So basically, there are now a lot of data sets from different research projects, but they are not available for use. So kind of linking them all together, supporting, actually putting them available is, I think, a major outcome, and also increasing the uptake of Earth observation data. Then there are a lot of challenges, of course, which is about kind of balancing between flexibility and difficulty. So basically how it's going to be used. And then there's different data accessibility issues. There are some delicate data that might not be good, or might not be possible to show for everybody. And then of course, finally, the long-term funding is always an interesting issue. But that's something that we are currently trying to fix. Okay, so now that was what I think that I'm really interested in, and I think that's a great development here, trying to draw all that stuff together. But then a few words about current project. So we've been doing this MARS work in a few of these Eurostat projects. The last year was about mapping marine areas and freshwater recreational services, and some of the conflicts that happen in a forested area, for example, between producing of timber and recreation. The next year, Eurostat grant, we are going to study more about the forested landscape and trying to improve the structural variables in the forest using this laser scanning and also multispectral Earth observation data. And then, well, this is just an example of the last year's project, which is this Velmu. I guess if you know it, but there was this really extensive mapping of coastal areas in Finland been happening many years. And I think we know currently better the marine areas than the terrestrial areas. And there were like hundreds of thousands of samples taken. And now this data is used there was the modeling of the ecosystem types. And then currently what last year was done was kind of improving the way we see the extent, the condition, the supply, the demand, and the flow and the value. So building the chain on base of the data that were collected in the last years. And then maybe kind of something still I have, yes, few minutes, maybe 1 minute, I guess, yeah. So is this, there is this project funded by Academy of Finland, IBC Carbon, which is about integrated biodiversity conservation and carbon sequestration in the changing environment. And basically the idea is we have like a few sites where we have been collecting really intensive data. So there are hyperspectral flights, there are also LiDAR, really intensive LiDAR, this laser scanning. There are also laser scanning with the drones, which is really high accuracy, also with the handheld laser scanner. And then we have sample plots with soil samples and canopy leaf samples and vegetation and moss and coverage. And then the idea is to be able to use this data to produce the indicators for forest structure and then upscale that to the whole country. So the idea is to have really good data on one area and then try to find the kind of linkages on how to update that to large areas. And this is just about one regional study, which I'm not going to go into any further details. Thank you.